All right. So this is an interview for House District 51. We have today with us the incumbent representative, Janelle Bynum. Thank you so much for finding time with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Could you give us a brief introduction? Many of our readers are already familiar with you and your work, but for those who aren't, tell us a little bit about yourself and your district and why you're running.
Thank you. My name is Janelle Bynum. I proudly represent House District 51 in the Oregon State Legislature. I serve the communities of East Portland, Damascus, Gresham, Boring, North Clackamas, and Happy Valley. I name them each because they are all dear to my heart, and I want to make sure that they always know that I love and care about each one of the residents in my district. I currently serve in the House as the interim House Judiciary Chair, the co-chair of the Police Accountability Committee. It's also known as the Joint Committee on Transparent Policing and Use of Force Reform. I'm also the Vice Chair of the Business and Labor Committee, and I sit on the Ways and Means Public Safety Subcommittee.
Great. Could you point us to a piece of legislation that you helped craft or pass in the past couple of years or in the last couple of sessions that you are particularly proud of?
There are a few. The first is the unlawful summoning, and that was born out of my experience in being stopped by the police when I was canvassing. And I often get asked, has anyone in Oregon ever used it? And my hope is that no, they would not have to use it because people are now aware of the consequences of, when they call the police on someone that looks out of place. I'm particularly proud of the work that we've done so far in police accountability, navigating those waters in times where people have like heightened tensions and are very suspicious of the other side, I think has been a key accomplishment. And then the oddest one I would say is the navigating the dispute between North Clackamas Parks and the city of Happy Valley as Happy Valley attempted to exit from the Parks District. So that was highly contentious, long-going argument, so to speak. And we emerged this short session with that bill. I wanted to say it was maybe the first one across the finish line in the short session that was ultimately terminated.
Great. Sorry, my screen froze. I'm having a bit of internet connection problems. Nigel,
okay.
Can you take over here, please?
Oh, I have a question. If you're, I think this is a bit of old news, and sorry for the background noise here, but would you talk a little bit about your work on the 2017, it's your previous term, if I'm correct, on the 2017 transportation bill. I think at the time, a lot of people credited you with the work on getting ODOT's investment or getting investments for ODOT and Outer Powell. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you accomplished that and to what extent we should credit that to you?
Well, I hesitate to take credit for anything personally, quite honestly, because I think politics is a team sport, a group effort. What I will take credit for is illuminating the fact that my residents did not have access to sidewalks as they should in the incorporation of that area into Portland and Multnomah County, or Portland. Their facilities were deficient. We saw when Senator Fagan had the district that she had to fight for sidewalks as well. So that was, I would say, a team sport, a team accomplishment in making sure that those monies ultimately ended up in the package. What was particularly difficult, and we still see the conversations going on now, is the conversation about tolling. We also are still wrestling with the conversation about what happens to the 205 funding and the fact that it's a shovel-ready project. So the fight continues for the interests of the residents of my district, but I certainly wouldn't take any large portion of credit. I just say I'm a team player and I'm at the table for my constituents.
Could you tell us where you stand on the issue of tolling?
I have seen in Virginia where tolling got to be close to $10 to drive on a freeway. And I don't think that that's the most appropriate thing for the residents of my district.
Does that mean you're completely against it, or you would be interested in it if there were some kind of equity component to make it less regressive and to cap the upper end?
I'm skeptical, to be honest with you. I just, when I saw the way it spiked in Virginia, a lot of times what they tell you will happen and what actually happens, there's a gap between those two. I'm just skeptical.
So if we have a long-term problem, as you know, with transportation funding, that we're dependent on the gas tax, and that is the federal gas tax hasn't gone up for decades, and the state gas tax is very vulnerable to people switching to electric or driving more fuel-efficient cars. So if we're not going to toll, how are we going to pay for the transportation projects and maintenance that we will need, regardless of what the future looks like?
Well, I think it depends on how people are traveling. We've seen a disruption in our travel habits just with this pandemic. And so do I believe travel patterns will remain the same going forward? No. So I think I'm certainly not a transportation expert. Let me be very clear. There are multiple ways to do tax policy that make it fair. I just don't think that tolling is the right thing for my district.
Great.
I'm sorry, I can't give you more than that.
Great. One of the questions that we've probably asked you in the past, and you won't be surprised to hear it from us again, is could you tell us a place or two, either a bill or an issue where you have bucked your caucus leadership, where you have said, I know that's the way you all are going, but I'm going in a different direction?
Yeah, there are quite a few examples. They generally don't come out publicly, but one that I think is really interesting is as part of the BIPOC caucus, we opposed the closure of the prisons most recently. We decided that it was very important for us to have a humane approach whenever we were closing down prisons. We took a lot of testimony that really captured how entangled the economy was with the siting of a prison. And as much as we were all very interested in reducing the prison industrial complex, we still felt that the humanity of the people in rural Oregon was paramount. And we needed to be very careful about that. So I know that it raised some eyebrows and lots of people are like, what? But that was a core value of ours. And I think that's important to stick to your values.
Okay, that's great, thank you. Are there other places where you have disagreed with, if not the caucus, the Democratic sort of orthodoxy?
I opposed, and I don't remember the exact bill. I remember it was about the consistency of how we do reporting and legislation around like sexual assault, things like that. And it was a very difficult position to take because what I detected was a patchwork of legislation in how people report and how people seek justice. And as much as I have two daughters and I have two sons, and I want to make sure that my daughters are protected when and if they were ever exposed to sexual harassment or sexual assault or anything like that. I also have a deep sense of justice, and I believe that the rules should be fair, the rules should be clear, people should not rush to justice. And in this particular case, I think we had one statute that said you had like 7 years to report, and another that said you had 3, and then another that said you had a different amount. And the issue that I brought up was that I felt like the state's expectations of reporting and the state's expectations of how long a person could assume that they were at risk for something. Let's say you have to buy an insurance policy or something like that. I thought that they should be consistent. So that's where, and I was the lone vote on that when it went over to the Senate. The Senate actually agreed and sent it back.
One of the local issues that we've asked a lot of candidates about in this cycle is the Metro Transportation Measure, which would pay for improvements in 17 corridors and add a light rail line to Bridgeport Village. Have you looked at that measure?
Very briefly.
Okay. Are you inclined to vote yes or no on that measure? I'm
inclined to vote no.
How come?
As I mentioned earlier, our traffic patterns are changing. I also believe that given the timing of it, that's probably my biggest concern with it, is not the fundamentals of it so much as it is the timing and making sure that our economy has a robust recovery and ensuring that we take these types of tax measures. There's a whole host of them on the ballot this next time, that we take them into consideration very carefully. What I think happens is that people feel good about particular proposals, as they should. But then when they get their tax bills, they get sticker shock. And they've voted all of them in for all of the right reasons. Yeah. And then there's also a disconnect between who's really paying. And so just to close out my thoughts, I have a daughter who's 18, and she works multiple jobs here in Oregon, and she's in school. The school's located in Georgia. And her biggest concern is that if she were to ever to move to Georgia and she worked there, that her wages would be so low. And that here in Oregon, she can earn quite a bit of money, but the cost of living is so high. And so she's constantly weighing, do I stay here and earn a decent wage, or do I move somewhere else where I'm not getting paid as much, but the cost of living is much lower. And so those economics are really coming into play for her. She can't afford an apartment here on what she makes, even with good wages. So I think it's something that people's tax bills are starting to become a lot more, they're starting to think about them a little more closely. And that's how I think of it.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions from my colleagues?
I have one. I know you're a supporter of Mayor Wheeler's, and also, as you've laid out, you have a record on police reform. And I'm wondering, he's criticized from that angle of not having been effective as the police commissioner and affecting police reform for the city. So I'm curious about why you have endorsed his reelection, because I think that your voice on that would provide an interesting perspective, your logic there.
Yeah, I have a couple of reasons. Number one, I believe the city deserves and demands stable leadership. Number two, I think that as we make the corner in terms of an economic recovery, and Portland is the economic engine of our state, that we need someone who is experienced with business and making business decisions to lead that recovery. I also think that between even him and Governor Brown and any of our leaders of our big cities and states around the country, nobody signed up for this type of turmoil, this type of like the pandemic, even, us lawmakers. It has been really difficult. And so there are a lot of people who are armchair quarterbacks on what they would do and what they would not do. But, we each have our areas of strength and we each have our areas of weakness. One of the things that I've tried to be a resource for in the city is what can we at the legislature do to help Portland? And so I've been very clear to say to him and his staff, what do you need from us? It's not my personal role to inject my feelings and thoughts in what should happen in Portland, unless it's on behalf of the people of East Portland. They have elected people to do that, and I won't do anyone else's job for them. But I will do everything I can at the legislature to help Portland, and keep in mind that what we do for Portland ultimately affects all of the other cities around the state, which is we're entrusted to care for them as well. So I believe the city deserves consistent, stable leadership. Otherwise, I believe it'll languish, and we can't afford that.
And one more, can you lay a top priority for this next term?
It is really to continue the police accountability and reform work. We have a misconduct database that I would like to see put forward. We have the conversation about arbitration and contracts that we also need to continue. We have the Crown Act, which was my second bill in the short session that we got this close. Crown Act and cashless discrimination, or cash discrimination. But I'd like to see the Crown Act pass as well.
The Crown Act.
I'm sorry to be so ignorant, but could you tell us more about the Crown Act?
Right. It is basically legalizing, like, even a hairstyle like what I'm wearing now, that's just braids, simple braids. When I was growing up, it was frowned upon to wear natural hairstyles in the workplace. It was, even up until recently, not allowed to wear natural hairstyles, traditionally African-American hairstyles in the armed forces. And so this would allow people to wear their natural hair untreated in the workplace and schools. One example I give is that my daughters, when they were going to camp, there was a specific line in the, what to prepare for in camp is no cornrows. And all little brown girls get their hair braided in June so they can swim and play and, live the summer life, right? And so I have always had to take my daughters to the doctor's office to get, this was the compromise that we worked out with the camp, take them to the doctor's office the day before to get a letter that I had to pay for, stating that they did not have lice. And lice is not something that traditionally affects African-American children in Oregon. Other kids have it at camp, but this was the extra burden that was placed on us. And I just didn't think it was fair or right. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, do you have further questions?
No, I'm done. I think we have one last question for you, Representative. Mm-hmm. And Rachel, you all done? We're asking everybody this same question. What is the most memorable moment, whether it was funny, sad, horrifying, embarrassing, that you've had on a Zoom call since this pandemic began?
Wow. My mother, bless her heart, always has to be camera ready. And we had a family Zoom call, and she was like, wait, I'm not ready. I got to put on my wig. And it was a family Zoom call, but she's just straightening it out on the camera. And it made me miss her and love her all at the same time. So family Zoom.
Yeah. Is she in Virginia?
I'm not telling you where she is. She will kill me.
All right. None of my business. None of my business. All right.
I understand that. I have family that would not appreciate my offering too much information either.
Yeah. Representative, thank you very much for your time. We're sorry that your opponents chose not to join, but it was good to see you.
My pleasure. I hope you're all well. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.